Africa did not lose power when its empires fell. It lost the language to describe power, because some of the most dangerous leaders in history didn't conquer land. They broke systems. If power is only measured in weapons, Africa lost. But if power is measured in pressure, Africa never stopped fighting. By the 1980s, the most powerful African leader on earth wasn't a president. He was prisoner number 4664. Nelson Mandela did not rule the largest empire. He did not command the biggest army. He never conquered foreign lands. And yet, by the early 1990s, some of the most powerful governments on earth were quietly adjusting their policies because of one African man sitting in a prison cell. That alone should force us to rethink what power really means. Because Mandela's power was not physical, it was psychological. It was symbolic. And most dangerously for oppressive systems, it was moral. When Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964, the apartheid government believed they had neutralized him forever. Robben Island was designed not just to imprison bodies, but to erase relevance. But something unexpected happened. Mandela did not disappear. He transformed the prison into a platform. While locked away, Mandela became a symbol powerful enough to unite people who had never met him across Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. His name began appearing in student protests, labor movements, and international debates. Ironically, the longer he was imprisoned, the more dangerous he became to apartheid, because apartheid depended on legitimacy, and Mandela was quietly stripping it away. By the late 1970s and 1980s, South Africa was no longer just fighting internal resistance. It was fighting global isolation. Countries imposed economic sanctions, trade restrictions, cultural and sports boycotts. South Africa was cut off from international competitions, financial institutions, moral legitimacy on the world stage. And at the center of this pressure was one unarmed man whose calm dignity made the brutality of apartheid impossible to defend. Mandela did not need to call for violence. The world applied pressure on his behalf. This is a crucial point. Mandela's power did not come from force. It came from making injustice too visible to ignore. One of the biggest misunderstandings about Mandela is the idea that he simply forgave his enemies out of kindness. That is not completely accurate. Mandela's restraint was strategic. He understood something many revolutionaries did not. If South Africa descended into racial revenge, it would justify global intervention, economic collapse, and endless civil war. So Mandela chose reconciliation, not because apartheid deserved forgiveness, but because the future demanded stability. Forgiveness, in Mandela's hands, became a tool of power. It disarmed his enemies morally. It reassured white South Africans. And it won global trust. That is not weakness. That is control. When Mandela was released in 1990 after 27 years, the world expected anger. Instead, they saw composure. That composure shocked everyone, including his former enemies. Within 4 years, Mandela became president. Not through conquest, not through coup, but through negotiated dominance. He inherited a nation on the brink of collapse and handed it a peaceful transition that historians still struggle to explain. Ask yourself this: how many leaders could endure nearly 3 decades of imprisonment and emerge without calling for blood? Very few. That is why Mandela's power cannot be measured in territory or weapons. It must be measured in what he prevented. Mandela did not destroy apartheid alone, but he made it unsustainable. He forced governments to choose sides, corporations to withdraw, media to expose contradictions, oppressors to negotiate. And he did it without commanding armies. That is power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to redefine the rules of the game. Nelson Mandela proved something history often forgets. The most dangerous leaders are not those who seek revenge, but those who deny their enemies moral cover. And that is why his power still echoes today. But Mandela's power was rooted in restraint. The next leader on this list believed power came from ideas, and ideas alone could dismantle empires. Kwame Nkrumah understood that if Africa ever united, no foreign power could ever dominate it again. Kwame Nkrumah understood something colonial powers never wanted Africans to realize. You do not need to defeat an empire militarily to destroy it. You only need to make it irrelevant. Nkrumah did not rise with armies. He rose with ideas, and those ideas scared Britain more than bullets ever could. When Ghana gained independence in 1957, the world celebrated. But Nkrumah was already thinking several steps ahead. To him, Ghana was not the victory. Ghana was the opening move. He famously warned, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa." That sentence alone explains why he was marked. Because Nkrumah was not asking for freedom. He was planning African unity, and unity was unacceptable. Colonial rule survived by fragmentation. Artificial borders, divided ethnicities, competing elites. Nkrumah's Pan-African vision threatened to collapse all of that. A united Africa would control its resources, speak with one diplomatic voice, reject foreign military bases, resist economic manipulation. To Western powers, this was not idealism. It was a geopolitical nightmare. By the early 1960s, Nkrumah was hosting liberation leaders, funding independence movements, challenging Western dominance openly. And then he was removed. In 1966, while Nkrumah was abroad, a military coup overthrew his government. Declassified documents later revealed what many suspected. Foreign intelligence agencies were watching and waiting. Nkrumah was exiled, his body removed from power. But his ideas? They survived. Today, African unity still scares global powers. That tells you everything you need to know about Nkrumah's relevance. He lost control of a country, but he planted a thought that refuses to die, and ideas once planted do not obey borders. If Nkrumah believed ideas could free Africa, the next leader believed belief itself could reprogram a nation. Thomas Sankara didn't want to rule Burkina Faso. He wanted to rewrite the African mind. Thomas Sankara ruled Burkina Faso for only 4 years. And yet, decades later, his ghost still unsettles presidents, bankers, and foreign institutions. That alone tells you how dangerous he was. Sankara rejected everything expected of African leaders. Luxury, foreign dependency, IMF loans, political obedience. He cut his own salary, sold government Mercedes, refused foreign aid that came with conditions. And then he said the unthinkable. "He who feeds you controls you." That sentence alone made him a target. Sankara challenged. Debt as modern colonialism, aid as control, elites as intermediaries of exploitation. He called on African leaders to refuse debt payments collectively. If that had happened, the global financial system would have cracked. 4 years later, Sankara was assassinated. His closest ally led the coup. The silence afterward was deafening. Sankara did not conquer territory. He conquered self-perception. He made Africans believe poverty was not destiny. Dependency was not inevitable. Leadership could be honest. That belief was too contagious to allow. Sankara showed how dangerous belief could be. The next leader understood something else. Money, not morality, is what truly moves the modern world. And when he touched global finance, the response was immediate. Muammar Gaddafi is one of the most misunderstood African leaders in modern history. That misunderstanding is not accidental, because behind the headlines, Gaddafi was attempting something radical. African financial independence. Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency, an African central bank, an African monetary fund. This would have undermined the US dollar, weakened the euro, reduced Western leverage over Africa. This was not tolerated. Inside Libya, the picture was different. Oil revenue did not vanish into foreign accounts. It was absorbed into the state. Education was free. Healthcare was universal. Housing was treated as a right, not a market. Libya recorded some of the highest living standards on the African continent. Foreign debt was minimal. The state controlled its resources, and external leverage was limited. This did not make Libya perfect, but it made Libya independent, and independence is expensive. The moment Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency, that independence crossed a red line. When Libya collapsed in 2011, the language was humanitarian, but the consequences were financial. African banking plans died. Libya's reserves vanished. The continent lost its loudest financial rebel. Whatever one thinks of Gaddafi, he crossed a line that few African leaders ever dared to approach. Before Gaddafi challenged the modern financial order, one African leader stood alone and exposed Europe's hypocrisy to the entire world. In 1936, Emperor Haile Selassie stood before the League of Nations. Ethiopia had been invaded, international law had been violated, and Selassie did something unprecedented. He told Europe the truth to its face. He warned, "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." Europe ignored him, and in that moment, the world revealed its hierarchy. Selassie exposed the limits of international law, the racism of global institutions, the selective morality of empires. Africa had spoken, and the world chose silence. The speech did not stop the invasion. It did something far more dangerous. It stripped empire of its excuse. For the first time, a black African leader stood before the world and forced Europe to hear its own words played back to it. Chemical weapons denied, international law ignored. A sovereign nation sacrificed for convenience. After that moment, silence became complicity. Ethiopia was not saved immediately, but something irreversible happened. The invasion was no longer a victory. It was a crime. Diplomacy shifted. Neutrality became embarrassment. The League of Nations was exposed as hollow, and the myth of European moral superiority cracked. From exile, Selassie didn't beg for sympathy. He applied pressure. He aligned Ethiopia with allied interests, without surrendering sovereignty. When the war turned, his return became non-negotiable. In 1941, Ethiopia was restored, not as a colony, not as a protectorate, but as itself. Selassie understood the lesson. Power was no longer about armies alone. It was about legitimacy, so he built institutions, not empires. Addis Ababa became Africa's diplomatic ground, a place where African disputes were settled, without European permission. In 1963, that vision became permanent. The Organization of African Unity was born, not as a revolution, but as a shield, against fragmentation, against proxy wars, against being spoken for. Selassie never defeated empire on the battlefield. He defeated it somewhere far more dangerous, in the courtroom of global legitimacy. Selassie became more than a ruler. He became a symbol of black sovereignty, a global icon, proof that Africa had ancient legitimacy. His power was not victory, it was exposure. Power in Africa did not die with empires, it transformed. Mandela showed restraint as dominance. Nkrumah proved ideas outlive coup. Sankara revealed belief is dangerous. Gaddafi crossed the financial red line. Selassie exposed the world's double standards. This was not weakness. This was a different battlefield. And the final question is no longer who was powerful. It is, who will be next, and what form will their power take? This is the side of Black history that rarely trends, because it doesn't flatter anyone. It shows that power can exist without permission, that resistance doesn't always look like war, and that the most dangerous ideas are the ones that refuse to disappear. If this story changed how you see power, don't let it end here. Like this video so the algorithm understands that African history deserves depth, not summaries. Subscribe to Echoes of the Ancients if you want stories that go beyond dates and textbooks. And comment below, which African leader do you think truly terrified global power and why? Because the conversation didn't end in history books. It continues here. This is Echoes of the Ancients, where forgotten power speaks again.